our CLBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard, John Summers, and Mike with something we're just crazy excited to do. Today, we're going to get to talk to Erin Price-Wright. Erin's a general partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Her mandate, her raison d'etre, if you will, is physical AI, meaning the use of AI to automate physical activities, whatever those might be. I think more broadly, Erin is central to the American Dynamism investment effort that A16Z has going. This is all about bringing manufacturing back to the United States, rethinking how we do things, finding new efficiencies, really launching the next generation of cutting edge manufacturing technology. Erin, we're so excited to have you. And can't wait to get into this conversation. It's about as hot a topic as there is. So thank you for making time.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're pumped. Mike, before we jump in with Erin, why don't you tell us what's happening on the screen?
Yeah, Maynard, man, we're really excited to have our guest on. So we're going to really try to make this lead in a real quick one. So as far as the bond market today, the 10-year bond yield's around 4.65%. It's down about 10 basis points this week, but it's still near all-time high. Well, not all-time high, highs for the year. As far as what bond traders are thinking about right now, obviously the Canadian tariff fight is in the news. The second thing is on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, we're going to have the core PCE inflation report that's going to come out. And consensus on that is around 3.3% year-over-year growth. And the most important thing is going to be on, Friday. Chairman Warsh is going to be basically having his Jackson Hole speech. This is his annual speech they do every year. He's going to be talking, and they're going to be probably laying out, what the Fed's policy benchmark looks like this year. So expect a lot of people to be looking Friday, and that's probably going to influence markets either late Friday and into Monday morning as well. So just keep your eye out on that. As far as equities, the Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, Russell, S&P 500, all last week were down 1, 2, 3 type percent. They're up marginally this week so far. I'd say the single biggest event that we're going to be basically talking about this week is NVIDIA. NVIDIA is going to be reporting Wednesday after the close. Obviously, that's going to basically be, given that they're the biggest market cap company in the world, all eyes are going to be on them. I think people are going to be looking to see what their 6 to 12 month outlook looks like, especially their capital spending outlook. And obviously that's going to have implications for not only the broader market, but telecom, technology, and this AI ecosphere out there. So keep an eye out on Wednesday. It's going to be a volatile market on Wednesday after the close and probably Thursday morning. So we're excited to see how things play out here. As far as oil markets, WTI this week is down about $5 a barrel to around $82 a barrel. And I think it's due to temporary optimism that there might be some sort of negotiations that could be happening. Now, obviously, the memorandum of understanding basically expired a couple weeks back. We've been going on off with Iran. I think people are hoping that there's going to be some resolution. Obviously, Treasury Secretary Bessent the other day came out with this Operation Economic Outcast, and obviously it's to sort of sever economic lifelines to Iran and hopefully bring them to the bargaining table. So, crude oil right now is optimistic that something's going to happen, but you know what? This has been going up and down for weeks, so we'll see how things play out there. The other thing we've been really talking about, besides oil, but is European natural gas prices. We've been talking about, that for the last 3, 4, 5 weeks. European gas prices from a U.S. dollar equivalent is around $23 an M right now. That's up $1 per MMBTU again this week. And we're basically at 4-year highs on TTF prices, and we're definitely at highs for this year. The one thing that we'd be saying here is that, EU gas prices, we've been talking about, they're going to go higher. We still feel that is going to be the case, and the reason why that is injection. Storage levels there are extremely low. We're at basically 15-year type lows, and the injections are just not there. So just to get, if they just put the current injections right now out to the end of the winter, out to the end of the injection season, we're going to basically hit minimum storage levels, and that's around 75%. So, things aren't looking good there. I think Europe is playing with fire right here by not injecting it more quickly, but we'll see how things play out here. As far as the energy sector, it's down. It was down slightly last week, and it's down slightly again this week. And it's down about 5 or 6% this month, and refiners are the biggest. It's actually up around 5 or 6% this month, and refiners are the biggest outperformers. They're up around 12 to 13%. As far as the power sector, it's been a mixed bag there. Electric utilities are down about 2-3%. For the last month, electric utilities are down about 5%, but IPPs, large generation companies and distributed generation companies, these companies are down anywhere from 8 to 15% over the last month. And that's because, you have rising interest rates, but you also have basically state level opposition to data centers. We saw that with Pennsylvania last week. We saw it with Texas at the beginning of August. So those things are going to continue to be in the news. So, we're watching out for it. Power sector, it's experiencing a little bit of a pushback. We're going to see what happens with NVIDIA's earnings on Wednesday and see if there's any implications, any fallout with their earnings for this sector as well. So with that, Maynard, we'll hand it back to you.
All right, fantastic. John, anything you would add before we jump in with Erin? I know you've been central to our budding friendship with the A16Z team. Anything you would add?
No, just that, Erin, we're so thrilled that you're here and excited for the conversation.
Awesome.
Well, Erin, I gave it the 50,000 feet intro there. This is a topic that I would say in our world, sort of the Houston, Texas, if I can call that industrial America, that loves tech. This is kind of top of the pecking order in terms of revolutionary stuff that could really change the world. Do you mind talking about a little bit this American Dynamism philosophy, how you guys are pushing these things, and maybe we can get into the art of the possible here?
Yeah, for sure. So, as you mentioned, so I help lead our American Dynamism practice at Andreessen Horowitz. And our goal with this fund and this investment practice and philosophy is we invest in companies that support the interests of the U.S. and our allies. And we do that because we think it's the most important work that we could be doing. And we also do it because we think that there's a lot of money to be made. So what does that actually break down in practice? We invest in companies that about half of our portfolio companies sell directly to the government, and that's really where we got started. Companies like SpaceX and Anduril that have large government businesses that saw, what happened with companies like Palantir and others that recognized that there were real inefficiencies in the way the government was working with its prime contractors and wanted to disrupt that and find a new way of making sure that our troops were prepared and that our federal government was prepared. And so about half of our portfolio companies sell into the government. And then about the other half of our portfolio companies really support kind of the broader Western industrial base. So recognizing that we're at a real moment in time, a real shift, where we had several decades of offshoring of critical capacity, especially in sort of supply chain and manufacturing, whether it's in heavy manufacturing or electronics or other critical components that we rely on for our life, and recognizing the brittleness in some of these supply chains in our ability to have self-determination as a nation. So a real economic imperative and need, as well as a national security need, to bring some of these supply chains home. That was why we started the practice many years ago. And really put our flag in the ground, so to speak, and made a commitment to invest in these categories. And in the years since, it's only grown and transformed. And I think energy has become an increasingly important part of that, as the geopolitics around energy have shifted so much in the last couple of years, both because of AI, because of this reindustrialization effort more broadly, as well as current conflicts and the geopolitical situation we're in today.
I was wondering, Erin, could you comment on like when it started? Because it feels like you guys started this, before the frenzy, showed up in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, we've been investing in the category for a long time. We were early investors in companies like SpaceX, Anduril, and Applied Intuition, among others. Shield AI, Skydio were some of our early investments in this category. And then as we were supporting them as a firm, we realized that this was the beginning of a true movement, that, there wasn't just going to be one company or two companies that got big in this space, that we were at the beginning of a real shift in the entire technology sector. So, we wrote the original American Dynamism manifesto. My partners, Catherine and David, wrote it, almost 6 years ago now. And when we were investing in some of these companies, we were often, the table was lonely. Like we were, looking around the table, there weren't that many other people. We were often responsible for underwriting multiple rounds of some of these businesses because there just wasn't a lot of private capital in the market here. Venture investors were not interested in funding hardware businesses in 2021 and 2022. They were going after SaaS and sort of the SaaS explosion. And so, we found ourselves, kind of lonely. So we're actually pretty happy that there's a lot of venture capital activity in the space now. It's a welcome and refreshing shift in the last couple of years.
So and this is just a layman's impression. Often when you think venture capital, I don't know what kind of dollars come to mind, but if you'll forgive the observation, this feels like dollars in big dollars, billions venture capital. So this is a different animal. Do you mind just talking about the capital involved here?
Sure. Yeah. And it really changes over the lifetime of a company. So fundamentally, we're early stage investors. So we will invest in two people with an idea in their garage and be the very first money in the business. So a check size as small as $1 million, where, there's no hardware, there's no software, there's no team, there's just a couple of people in a dream, and we'll invest all the way up through pre-IPO rounds in the business. So especially together with our growth team, they're writing the $100 million to $1 billion checks in some of these rounds that are the ones that kind of make it to the front page of the Wall Street Journal. But we're really starting early. We're partnering with founders before they have built their first factory, before they've moved any dirt, before they've bought a mine. We're as they're really developing the concept, and so we're pretty flexible to invest kind of all along that spectrum of $1 million to $1 billion. What we are seeing is that as, later stages of these businesses, as, they have cash flow, as they're building factories, as they have physical footprint and infrastructure, the mix of capital around the table gets a little bit different. So where traditional venture capital comes in much earlier, for a much more unproven idea, traditional capital is starting to come into some of these technology growth rounds. So it won't just necessarily be a VC around the table. We're starting to see, players like Carlyle and Apollo, JP Morgan, et cetera, underwrite some of these businesses as they start to scale, but maybe 2 or 3 clicks before when they historically would have partnered with them in the public markets, for instance.
So do you think of these things as, and I'm sure maybe the answer here is going to be a little bit of both, but there's a part of this which is you create something new and impressive and revolutionary, and it gets incorporated into an existing platform or business. And in that sense, the big industry is your customer. But there's another part of this, which is, hey, maybe we're going to rethink entirely how something is done, in which case big existing industry is not your customer. You're going to replace them or revolutionize their business. How do those relationships work with big existing industry?
Frankly, we invest in both, and are excited about both styles of opportunity. In the former, there are companies, whether it's a Raytheon or whether it's a large energy company, are feeling supply chain bottlenecks and are looking for ways to use AI, incorporate AI, diversify their supply chains, domesticate their supply chains, move faster. And they're more willing to work with a wider set of partners in order to do that. Like, let's take sort of deep sea oil and gas drilling as an example. You need to do various forms of inspection and maintenance. Historically, you send boats with crews out These are usually contractors that you work with. They're extremely expensive. They hire divers. They use all these exquisite systems and equipment. They go down, they inspect your equipment. They do surveys for you. They help with environmental remediation. It's a massive line item for these companies. And the capacity of these contracting firms is booked up years in advance. It's hard to get availability. It's hard to move quickly. Like, that is a perfect type of problem for a robotic solution to help solve much more efficiently, much more quickly, much lower price point, where you have a lot more control over the end result. So that's an example where, we have a company, Ulysses, that builds small autonomous submarines, and they're working with the oil and gas industry to replace a lot of sort of the human contractor labor that these companies are very happy to find, alternative ways to get around. So that's one example of, like, our companies want to partner with big industry. They're a reliable partner. They'll sign big contracts. They'll help a company grow. They'll push, they'll help pay for and, underwrite some of the R&D that happens. On the other hand, there are some industries that have really struggled to adopt technology over the last 30 years. And many entrepreneurs in these categories are realizing that these are big industries to go and disrupt directly. So on the other side of the spectrum, we have a company called Mariana Minerals. They're a vertically integrated mining and refining company that's fully AI first. And, their philosophy really is, it doesn't make sense to try to sell a bunch of technology to a mining company that's going to be so slow to change its mining operations. We're just going to do the mining ourselves. So we're going to go out and bid on these projects and buy these mine sites and deploy robots and deploy reinforcement learning and all of our software. And we're just going to do it better. We're going to sell the same commodity product in the market, but at a much, but be able to produce it much more efficiently and drive scale much better than our competition. So, we really see both ends of the spectrum, and both business models are seeing success.
Sometimes, Erin, find myself asking sort of like, why now? Like, why are we here? And you look at AI is, of course, an incredible revolution that's happened. The supply chain realization. Okay, we've had that one, particularly COVID and onward. We added in geopolitical stress that, is at heightened levels. We also have this skilled labor shortage that people feel very intently. And then obviously we have improvements in, quote, robotic technology. So it just, I guess I feel like the answer is a soup of things is happening simultaneously that is driving all this. But do you feel like this is more the innovation is making it possible, or the need is forcing the innovation, to bear fruit?
That is the $1,000,000 question. And I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. That we're at a unique moment in time, from a talent perspective, from a technology perspective, from a capital perspective, from a need perspective, and from a bipartisan policy perspective. All of these things are overlaying at the exact same time, and just causing an explosion. And what's really exciting to see is that momentum and energy is making young, hungry, entrepreneurial, technical talent excited to build in these categories that haven't seen this type of innovation in many decades. And, as someone, I spent most of my early career at Palantir in oil and gas, out at platforms and in the fields with the petroleum engineers, helping them, figure out how to use software. I would tell my friends what I was doing, and they were like, why are you doing that? Like, you could be working at Google. And I was like, no, it's cool. Like, it's fun to get to touch rocks and touch metal. And now, the prevailing mentality among sort of young, hungry, technical folks who are graduating and trying to figure out what to do with their life, they're excited to work on these hard and gnarly problems. And I think that's the real win. Is that it's, working in industrial spaces is sexy. sexy again. And I think we'll see the fruits of that play out over the next decade with what I would consider to be like the next great American industrial build out.
Erin, on that point, it seems like a lot of the, I'll call it blue chip venture capitalists in the Valley have generally stayed away from energy, call it over the last 2 to 3 decades. I think to your point, why is that? And obviously they're moving back now, which you alluded to earlier. And why is that?
Well, I mean, there was like the climate investing of the 2010s, which certainly saw some activity and some hearts broken. I think like over the last several decades, we just frankly haven't seen large scale load growth in the United States. Like all the load growth that we saw over the last, 3+ decades was essentially offset by efficiency gains. Whether it's, industrial efficiency gains or, our changing our light bulbs and, getting more efficient cars and all these other things, which have been great, which are really important. And I'm glad those things happened. But really, we're at a moment for the first time where we've sort of exhausted the low-hanging fruit efficiency gains that we're likely to see in this sort of, barring some big technical, a new technical revolution. And we're starting to see like huge load growth for the first time in a very long time. And that is happening at the same time as a lot of the equipment that we've been using in industrial settings and on the grid are starting to age out, and we're getting to a big replacement cycle. So it's a moment in time that we just haven't had, in several decades in the United States. That load growth is coming both from the AI boom, which is, I think we could probably talk for several hours about the AI data center controversy. But regardless, like we're talking about needing to add new capacity to our energy grid that, are sort of the numbers are sort of unheard of in modern times. The reindustrialization effort, like if we're talking about building factories, whether it's for missiles or drones or robots or cars or new refining capacity, building silicon domestically, like all of that requires a ton of energy that we don't have. And in addition to just sort of the broader industrial electrification that we're seeing generally, like these, we're in a machine replacement cycle where the new machine might be more of an electric load than the old machine. So all of that is happening kind of at the same time, which is, I think leading to a realization that this is actually a really important growth category, that there will be, we're in a moment where there is the possibility for new innovation is really high. And there's also very much bipartisan appetite to drive innovation in the energy sector more broadly. So the administration's focus on nuclear has been a strong driving force. We're seeing the first nuclear reactors under design review and get approved for the first time in many decades. So you have all these things sort of over on top of each other that I think are causing venture capitalists who have been typically, probably rightly so, shy of this industry to actually wake up and pay attention.
That's fantastic. One of the other things that you alluded to earlier and you've spoken about extensively publicly is the need for more builders and younger builders, particularly that understand the intersection of software and hardware. And you guys have gone so far as a sort of engineering fellows program. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we started an engineering fellows program on our team, and the idea was really to get young technical builders excited about some of these categories. It's and if you look at, for example, I like Stanford electrical engineering grads for the last 15 years, maybe 20 years. How many of those graduates who have, real skills that we desperately need in our industrial economy, how many of them are working as AI researchers? And I'm not saying that it's not important to do AI research. It's very important. And I'm glad that, the best and brightest for a long time went into that sector because that's helping fuel what we have today. But we're just not seeing enough young people who have sort of hard engineering skills who want to work on and solve some of these problems, or we hadn't historically been. That's definitely changing, in part because of companies like SpaceX making it cool again. But we're trying to do our part. So we hire folks who are sort of early career, new grad to 5 years out of school, with kind of technical engineering backgrounds who are interested in the American Dynamism category, to spend a year with us. And first of all, learn what we look for when we look at businesses. So be part of the investment process, really understand how we think about companies, how we think about company growth, how we think about, go to market in some of these, tough categories and more traditional industries. Spend a lot of time with our companies who need help hiring or on technical projects. So they really understand like what the problems these American Dynamism companies are having. And then, many of our engineering fellow grads have gone off and started companies of their own that we've invested in. Some have joined companies as, hardware engineering leaders or engineering leaders, but who have some context around the business, or even become investors themselves.
One of the other things, and you mentioned it in your lead into American Dynamism, is we certainly want to focus on what America needs, but there's also a question of our allies. And this is topical since Maynard's in Norway. And we've spent quite a bit of time with the Norwegians in particular, thinking through some of these same problems. And there seems to be a shared, thread of philosophy between our two countries, and I think we're excited to explore that in certainly more detail. My question is, you've certainly studied and worked on both sides of the pond, specifically around, I'll call it, everything you are focused on: industrial innovation, robotics, energy technology. The venture capital and entrepreneurship focus in the U.S. is multiples of what it is in Europe. Why do you think that is, and how can we be helpful in pushing some of that innovation on the other side?
Yeah. I think we fundamentally we're a country of builders and of people that, want to take risks and try things and are willing to fall on our faces doing it. And we tend to be more willing to push the envelope. That said, we can't do this without our allies. So, when I look at our companies, whether it's in the industrial and energy space or even, very much so in the defense space, they're finding a lot of success in partnering with our allies, not just in Europe. The Middle East has been very keen to work on a lot of this stuff and are certainly feeling this very viscerally themselves. Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Australia. Our companies are finding very deep partnerships, both upstream on the supply chain side, like who knows how to manufacture turbines? It's the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Germans. So when we want to learn how to do some of these better, it's that not everything is something that we need to invent from scratch. Like there are people who are in our, in our democratic corner, who are keen to help and support and work with us and figure out how to scale with us. And then when you look at a lot of what's coming out of Eastern Europe with Ukraine, like a lot of the innovation around manufacturing at scale, under duress, autonomy at scale, the usage of autonomy at scale in very specific ways to solve a very specific purpose. Our companies are looking at those lessons and realizing that we need to bring a lot of that back to the United States, and not just in a defense context. So obviously, munitions, drones, et cetera, we have a ton to learn from what the Ukrainians have learned, out of necessity on the front line. But how do we apply a lot of that thinking to other industries where we've taken a very exquisite approach to design and engineering? So, we have the difference between a $4 million missile and a $250K missile that is almost as has almost the same specs, but is easier to manufacture, has a simpler supply chain, simpler design, much, much cheaper. That same paradigm shift is happening, in the energy space. So like, where do we have, 17 pieces of extremely exquisite equipment that was designed in maybe the 60s or the 70s? I'm thinking of transformers as a great example, where there's a huge supply chain bottleneck. We're having, a lot of trouble procuring them. There's only one supplier that makes cold roll electric steel in the United States. These are extremely heavy things to install. They're very hard to repair. There's a lot of similarities between transformers and, the missiles of the Cold War. And then you have a new technology come in like solid state transformers, which is like, we can do this with silicon carbide. We can do this in software. We can, combine 8 pieces of equipment into 1 piece of equipment for a fraction of the price and much higher efficiency. We can manufacture it in a modular way and make it, easily repairable in the way that a traditional system isn't. So it's taking a lot of the learnings that have come from the defense sector and applying them to some of these other categories. And so we're certainly like taking spiritual learnings, if you will, from some of what's happened in Eastern Europe and trying to apply them to the problems we're having. I get that that's not your question. Like, Europe has a lot of things that it needs to fix about how it encourages technology growth and development. And I think, there are people that are aware of and working on that. And I wish them luck. And in the meantime, a lot of our companies are partnering with those governments to reach their goals.
Erin, I think you may have answered this question already, but I'll ask it again. What do you think, in your view, is the biggest bottleneck to physical AI today? Is it sort of capital? Is it labor? Is it energy, regulations, deployment? What is it?
I think it's deployment, but the problem is deployment encompasses a lot of those complexities, which is that, debatably, but even in the last 2 weeks, some of the research from many of the robotics labs, for instance, that's come out from places like Generalist and Dyna and some of these companies that are really working on the kind of cutting edge front line of robotics is incredible. Sort of ChatGPT level, like, wow, we're getting to a moment where, robotics is really quite good for a lot of tasks that it could be doing out in the world. Unlike large language models, where you have access to all of this training data and essentially simulation environments, because you just deploy a model in the cloud, you can run it right away. I can deploy it as an office worker in New York. I can deploy it as a software engineer in Texas instantly and get instant feedback and provide instant feedback to the model to be able to get better. That's one of the reasons why we've seen such growth and uptake and also fast improvement in the language models side of AI. Physical AI is a lot harder because you can get to a baseline pretty good model, and that's like 1% of the journey. Then you have to get that model onto a physical device and deal with all the edge cases that happen when you have a physical device operating in the world. Like, what if it falls over? And how do you charge the battery? And what about when its actuators wear down and stop working? There's all these complexities of having something that moves around and interacts with the world. And then you have to deploy that against a real problem that has, safety concerns, it has regulatory concerns, labor concerns, training concerns. So the actual deployment of physical AI systems is really, really hard process. And when we think about what we're excited about in the robotics category and where we're investing, it's companies where we think they have a differentiated edge in that deployment. And often it's because maybe the people on the team actually understand the industries that they're going to go deploy in. It's people who have worked in these places, who have empathy for what it means to plug in cables or what it means to do undersea inspection, or who know what it means, or can empathize with what it means to actually have to deploy something in a mine. How do you deal with dust? That's not a problem that people who are building LLMs have to think about, dust. But it's certainly a problem a lot of our companies have to deal with. So we're at the beginning of I think of the very beginning of what will be a very, very long process for deploying physical AI into kind of real environments to do real work.
It was really interesting. You started off basically saying you guys were early into physical AI. And I'm just curious, these founders of these companies, push physical AI. What are investors missing, or what are they getting wrong? What were they getting wrong, and what are they getting wrong today too?
Yeah, I think a little bit you have to walk before you can run. There isn't a shortcut. And so much of this is about building that trust and you know, and taking it sort of step by step. Like, when I hear a pitch from someone who is like, "Oh, we're gonna like fully automate a factory for XYZ," and I'm like, "Why? Like, like what are the economics of that? Like, what are you doing that because of the aesthetics of having an automated factory? Like, sure, that can be the end goal, but like, walk me through the actual journey to get there." And so, the businesses and founders that we really like backing are ones where they're taking a much more practical approach to the deployment of physical AI. So like, what is like one activity on a factory line where you have enough scale and standardization that actually makes sense to invest in automation? And let's do that and prove that out. And we can, fill in the gaps with people who are good and can learn and are flexible and are, the greatest machines God ever made, and augment them where it makes sense, and continue to bite off pieces as we go, versus someone that wants to come in and deploy robots to do all sorts of things that humans today are just much better at.
Erin, one thing you said there that really caught my ear is you talked about an advantage in deployment, and all of these discussions around technology and geopolitics, they often come back to our competition with China.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about, talk about a place that seems to have, that is their comparative advantage seemingly is in deployment. They move faster, they build faster. The thinking there's less debate about should we or shouldn't we, the permit, if there is one, all this stuff. So that Chinese edge in deployment, if you agree they have that, how do you think about the US versus China in this category?
Yeah, they certainly have an edge in being able to make unilateral decisions and move quickly. And I think the results of that from an industrial perspective have been extremely impressive. I think where the United States has the benefit of is one of our strengths is that we don't move unilaterally. So that can be a big challenge to some of our companies. And in some places, we definitely need to remove red tape and make it easier to build and try things. But, we let lots of different versions of an idea proliferate and may the best one win. And I think that's the strength we have to lean into is, the ability to let builders and entrepreneurs and people who are on the front lines and on the ground actually experiment and try things and innovate and move faster. And versus, the top-down industrial policy that China has, which is like, okay, this is the way you build a nuclear reactor. Now copy paste, we're going to build 100. Like who's more likely to build, the next great design for a nuclear reactor? It's probably a country that's trying 100 different nuclear reactors versus deploying 100 at scale. That said, the process knowledge I think that China has gained over the last 30 years will be very hard. It is going to be very hard for us to, get back. And so we have to do it quickly. And I think that process knowledge applies across a number of different industries. It applies across nuclear. It applies across electronics manufacturing. It applies to, there's like 10 different refining of critical minerals and mining, 90+% of the critical minerals we use every day are not mined in China, but they're refined in China. And building up that muscle and learning how to do that again from scratch, essentially, in the United States is going to take kind of real concentrated effort and alignment across both the private and public sector to say, this is actually something we want to do and encourage, because we've really lost some of those muscles that China has just spent the last several decades kind of strengthening.
Where do you see we had Senator Alan Armstrong on the show, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we were just talking about permitting. And her permitting seems to stick out. Yes, we go slower, and yes, we fund all kinds of alternatives and try all kinds of things, but our permitting regime does seem so flawed.
Well, I think Sorry, you can finish your question.
No, it's just how, as you think about a risk factor to all this happening at the speed and in the with the success we hope to have, do you see permitting as like a real risk here that has to be dealt with? Like, where do you put that on the policy wish list?
High, very high. Fortunately, there's a bill in the Senate. Well, the House wrote it, passed it in the Senate. It's getting negotiated. Hopefully, we're looking very closely at that one for permitting reform, and maybe just like in general, permitting in the United States is an advantage. Like, we have laws that we have to follow, and it makes this country a better country to live in. Like, I am glad that we don't dump toxic waste. I am glad that we take care of our forests. Like, I think these things are important, and I'm not here to say that we need to remove all permitting. I think a couple of things need to change in the United States. First of all, I think as a society, we need to look around and decide if we want to be a society that builds. Like, is it important for us to create new things and create pathways to make new things, or is it not? And our policy and the way we permit and regulate needs to be reflective of that desire to as a society, build new things. And then, I think that translates into, you need regulatory certainty. Like, I need to know that if I follow the rules, that my project will get built. Like, I need to know that if I go through the process, there is a timeline that I can tell my investors, that I can financially underwrite, that if I do everything correctly and follow the letter of the law, that, I'm not, the rug isn't going to get pulled out for me. And I have a timeline that I can construct my plant, build my factory, operate my mine, that I can take to the bank. And that's the problem where we are today, is there just like isn't, things are getting moved around in these like parallel cycles where nobody feels the impetus to actually make a decision on everything. And there's too much opportunity for like a cover your ass, I'm passing this decision on to someone else. And at the end of the day, we just need to hold our regulators accountable for essentially approving permits. And if the permit is denied, fine, the permit is denied. Like, that's a separate conversation. And probably there are permits and regulations that we should remove. But like, fundamentally, like, what I think is the most important thing is that entrepreneurs have to be able to go through a permitting process, follow the rules, and know that their project is going to get built. And that's the thing that I think we have to figure out as a country. One thing I will say, sorry, you
Just get excited. This is good.
One thing I will say is that AI has made this process a lot easier. So, we see this, I've seen it with our nuclear investments, our mining investments. We're talking about complicated regulations and thousands of pages of documentation that you have to provide, and lots of back and forth. And we've seen that multiple examples of this now, where our companies are using LLMs to move through a permitting process much faster. So much so that their counterparts in government are asking what tools they're using and how they can get access to those tools too. So we had this. We had this for one of our companies. There were some state regulators in Utah that were like, your applications are so good, you're so responsive, like, everything is perfect. How are you doing this? Like, how are you able to move so quickly? Like, can we have access to the software that you guys have in order to do your reviews faster? So that gives me some hope that there's an opportunity to collaborate better using technology to make some of these review processes faster. But you definitely need, a mindset and a policy shift to say that there is the expectation that, you come to a decision.
So one thing you said that I was really struck by there is you said we need to decide as a country if we want to build or not. And when we put it that way, and in our circles, like, who wouldn't want to be a builder? Like, who doesn't want to have a great economy? But when you pause on it, you arguably some people might say not, or they might say it in a different way. They would say, yeah, that's great, but please don't build it in my community, or please don't, et cetera. And the data center discussion is kind of right at the center of all that right now.
Yeah.
Do you feel like as we convince the nation, we want to be builders, we want to go for it, we want a great economy, we don't want to lose to the Chinese, so on and so forth, that there has to be a better mission statement, if you will, from leadership, whether that's the White House, the tech community, the energy community, whatever it is? Like, how do we, because we only have mild support to be
Yeah,
built.
that's generous.
Yeah. So how do we change the dynamic, and then that will infuse, it'll make everything easier.
I think it's interesting. This is like one of the beauties of our federalist system is we can actually just run 50 experiments. And my theory is that the state, well, like specifically with respect to the data center issue, I do agree. I think we need a better, like, the AI CEOs have done a really bad job. The tech industry has done a really bad job of telling the positive story for AI, and understandably, people are scared, and it doesn't help that their gas prices are going up and their energy prices are going up. So all these things get conflated. But if you think about the process of building a data center in a community, there's a ton of private capital right now available to essentially subsidize the complete modernization and redevelopment of the energy grid. Like, that's an insane opportunity that we have right now as a country, and to also reinvigorate a local industrial economy. And so my theory is that the states and regions that figure out how to build data centers, which includes, how do you add energy capacity, new energy capacity to a region? How do you modernize a grid infrastructure to be able to handle flexible loads, and, large scale new modern power installations? How do you build a high tech EPC community around constructing new data centers? So that's, these are extremely complicated engineering projects. And sure, the specific jobs for one specific data center might only last 12 months, but you're talking about, very high skilled electrical engineering and plumbing. Like the Vera Rubin racks, like they're so heavy, like the structural work that has to happen to make all of this fit within these boxes. The mechanical engineering for the complexities around the HVAC systems, like these are really high skilled. This is really high skilled work. And when I zoom out 10 years and think about the proliferation of the factories of the future, whether it's for robotics or defense or semiconductors, I think the regions that figure out how to do this for data centers are going to take the lion's share of economic growth for the next 2 or 3 decades. And so it's really a test. It's kind of an IQ test. The onus falls just as much on state and local governments to figure out how to tell that story to their, local communities as it does, the tech companies. And at the end of the day, these communities are going to benefit massively from from taxes, from job growth, from economic activity. So, this isn't like an isolated thing where, you say no to data centers and you still get to be part of the future. It'll be a really kind of bifurcating event is my theory, and we'll see, who figures it out.
John and Mike, as we turn back to you guys, would you mind, John, just sharing a little bit for our audience what we're planning for September 10th? I think we're just pumped to be working with you guys, Erin, but John's been closest to it, so I thought I might ask him to touch on it.
Absolutely. No, Erin, we're so excited. I think as we were really brainstorming with the A16Z folks, we had this big conversation around, what is the future of energy hold? How do we infuse more of that technology angle with the traditional industrial base? Because it hasn't historically matured quite as fast as we would have thought. And so, after brainstorming a little bit, it was, hey, there's really not an energy technology conference. There's literally a conference for everything in the world except for energy technology, which is fascinating. And so I think what we're so excited about is that A16Z and Veriton together are putting on the first energy technology conference here in the United States, here in Houston, Texas. That'll be in September We're very excited about that. Obviously, some unbelievable companies, both from the A16Z portfolio as well as from Veriton's portfolio, will be there. There's going to be something around 100 to 125 energy and industrial companies in attendance. And so when we think about the way to proliferate and to cross-pollinate ideas, there's no better place than where energy, technology, and that industrial base collide. And so that's really what we're so excited about. Erin, I don't know if there's anything you'd add there, but man, we're thrilled.
Yeah, and I know we're thrilled, as are our companies. I think it'll be a great venue to talk about a lot of this in a lot more detail.
Mike, any closing thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, that's pretty hard to top right there, John, but we'll try. We often ask this 10-year question of, what's the future going to look like? And if we do a look back 10 years from now, what 2 or 3 industries are most transformed by physical AI, and which ones are going to surprise us the most, either on the upside or the downside?
Oh, good question. When you look at the TAMs of some of these industries, probably energy, critical minerals, and manufacturing are 3 of the largest TAM industries in the world, or energy, minerals, and manufacturing are 3 of the largest TAM industries of the world that just have so much room to grow in terms of in terms of technology penetration, that I think these 3 categories will be pretty massively disrupted by especially AI over the next decade. I'm very excited to see. I think what we've seen happen in space and defense are coming for these sectors. We have proven founders and entrepreneurs that have shown that they can do it, and they're bringing their expertise into these, massive categories where there's just absolute ton of economic upside. I'm really excited. I'm very excited to see what happens. I think we're, at the beginning of a new industrial age, it's exciting times ahead.
You think that, well, that's a really punchy line to end on, which is the beginning of a new industrial age. The SpaceX example is so stunning and so incredible, and has unlocked so many other things. Do you think that, you mentioned about half of your businesses with government or government-related entities. Is government, and I know this is a broad-based question, but do you see innovation happening in that customer base, government-related entities, where they're really going to transform how they do business, how they contract, what risks they'll take, what the contract looks like, how they interact with technology firms, how they make direct investments? I mean, obviously all this stuff is starting to change, but what would you tell us about them as customers and how much them changing will be a critical ingredient in all this?
Yeah, it's huge. So I mentioned, I used to work for Palantir. It took Palantir about 15 years and suing the government, their customer, to get their first $100 million program of record contract. And we have multiple examples of our companies in our portfolio that got, multi-$100 million contracts within, 2 to 3 years of operating. So huge credit. We are standing on the shoulders of giants. SpaceX, very similar. It took them more than a decade and also a lawsuit with their core buyer and customer to get to their first $100 million contract. So,
and everybody watching is like, I got to sue my customers to get it.
They did it for you. They did it for you. And so, it's slow, and it's kind of like 2 or 3 steps forward, 1 step back, but there is huge change in how the government is thinking about procuring technology and working with companies. Everything from procurement reform, commercial first, how they do contracting, how they think about software, all of this being accelerated first by conflict in Ukraine, second by the conflict in the Middle East, third by, because was sort of, overlaid with the geopolitical situation with China and Taiwan. So it's bipartisan. It's, everybody wants it. Everyone's sort of rowing in the same direction. It's an extremely complicated beast to unwind. So it's still slow and there are still roadblocks, but we're certainly making progress there. And I think that having a few example success stories of companies that have gone through the journey and really paved the way. And then having a lot of alumni from those companies start new companies. And now we're starting to see sort of third and fourth generation founders who have grown up in this ecosystem and know how to do it. And so what's exciting now is that it's starting to happen outside of the government as a buyer category as well, in the broader industrial base. And the government, it can serve in many ways as an initial subsidizer. Like they're going to be willing, they have 100x willingness to pay relative to the private sector for a new battery technology or a new nuclear technology or, some of these other things where maybe the first 10 units cost an astronomical amount that is just not commercially viable. The government can help be a partner there as the technology gets to scale and gets ready to kind of make its way out into the commercial market.
Erin, one thing we've been keenly focused on in our portfolio and more broadly, and I think we've touched on this in a few different ways, certainly on government purchasing, certainly on permitting, and a few other things, we're focused on resilience. And obviously in the energy industry, we have both commodity cycles and business cycles. I think in government, political cycles. How can we ensure that a lot of what we're trying to get through, whether it's permitting reform, whether it's trying to change government procurement, how can we ensure that those stay resilient through political, business, and commodity cycles?
This is a very good question. I don't have a great answer. I think, the speed that many of our companies have been able to move in the last 18 months, given a number of executive orders that have been, very helpful for moving things faster, it has been great to prove that technology works and that, there is room for innovation in many of these categories. And I think that at this point now, we have to translate a lot of that into regulatory wins because at the end of the day, entrepreneurs need to be able to plan their businesses. So, we're in that like growing up phase of how do we cement this into like longer term contracts, relationships, certainty around permitting, certainty around regulation. There's a lot of willingness to figure out how to do that, but it's not going to be easy. It's not like our regulators have gotten a lot done in the last handful of years. So getting some of these things codified in a larger sense of certainty. At the end of the day, like in the United States, businesses are here to make money. They're not here at the whim of the government. And companies have to develop a product and an efficiency in building that product using the labor pool that's here in the U.S. and the economic realities that are true here in the US and build an economically viable product. And that should not change. Like we shouldn't, I don't think we want to put our hand too far on the scale to remove that reality. But there's certainly a lot of help in the interim to make the process of getting to that economic scale a little bit easier for some of these businesses.
Well, Erin, you've been super generous with your time. It's so hard to let you go because, wow, this is such a topic. More to come on September 10th and more to come broadly. Can I squeak in a last one?
Sure, yeah.
Our audience is, imagine you've got all kinds of companies from throughout the energy, power, technology, but, scale, complex. If I'm a CEO and I'm watching this, and I'm thinking, I'm really interested in this topic. I want to do more in this topic. How do I get my organization to think more about this topic, to innovate more in this way? Like, do you have any suggestions for those CEOs, laying awake at night trying to figure out how they could get more physical AI into their business?
Very good question. First of all, I think being open to working with startups and newer players as a large company and how to cut red tape and provide some of the sort of CEO level top cover so that, what many in your organization might see as a threat is able to operate. The second thing I would say is we used to do this at Palantir. It was sometimes I think it was 50% of our value add at Palantir with some of these large traditional enterprises is, you have smart people working for you. They're probably young and buried in the organization. You have no idea who they are. Go look at your login logs and see who's using Claude tokens on Saturday. Find the young guy who maybe shouldn't be even working at your company. And
I love that.
find him or her. They're probably 23. They have no idea what's going on, but they're creative. They have ideas. They're tech native. They know about AI, and just let them build some stuff. Let them try things, empower them, build a culture of risk taking and entrepreneurship in your organization such that, you're able to not just attract that kind of talent in the future, but bring new ideas. And also it makes it easier for startups and tech companies to work with you if they have, a cultural ability to communicate. So that would be a very tactical piece of advice.
Fantastic. Love it. Erin, thank you. We know you got to run, but really appreciate it and have so enjoyed this and can't wait for more.
Thank you so much. This is really, really fun.
Okay. Yes, it is. Here we go. Thanks, Erin.